Good morning. And welcome to UUCC, Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. We are a group of spiritual freethinkers who gather to celebrate life, build community, and better the world. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. I'm Jill Poremba, your worship associate for this morning, and the service today will be led by our minister, Eileen Casey Campbell. Thank you to everyone on this morning's worship team, also including music by Bill Mells and Children's Church for Children 3 and Over by Nancy Reed and Pat and Kaya Mells. If this is your first visit, welcome. We invite you to sign the visitor's book in the entryway. And whether it's your first visit or your 1000th, we are glad that you came. This service is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel. We will plan on continuing with hybrid worship services throughout the church year, so you can join us each week here in person, on Zoom, or later on YouTube. To help us better connect with our friends watching from home, please turn around and give a wave to the camera. At the end of the service, we will invite our friends on Zoom to turn on their cameras and return the wave. I have a few announcements to share with you today. If you have a joy or a sorrow to share, please fill out the card on your chair. We invite you to bring them forward and place them in the basket, and after Bill rings the chimes and begins to play. You can also come forward to drop a pebble in the water at that time if you have a joy or sorrow that you prefer not to share. You are invited to a spiritual deepening 3-church brainstorming session and potluck on Friday, September 20th from 6 to 8 p.m. at First Universalist Church of Rochester. Join in community to share a meal and generously offer your thoughts, ideas, and perspectives to the 3-church worship team and the spiritual deepening packet team on transformation, equity, interdependence, pluralism, and justice. All ages are welcome. I have another announcement. Bear with me, it's a long one. A very exciting climate justice revival is sweeping the UU world this September, and we are going to be part of it. On September 28th and 29th, congregations will host UU climate justice revivals to collectively reimagine a spirit-filled and liberatory future. Through conversations, worship, and advocacy, congregations will work together to realize climate justice and collective liberation in our communities. On Saturday from 9 to 1, our congregation will identify opportunities for climate justice in our unique context, develop a vision of a flourishing future, identify a clear set of potential actions that we can take to realize this vision, enable participants to understand their roles in the interdependent ecosystem of creating climate justice and collective liberation. Sunday, our worship will be focused on climate justice. Following worship, we'll engage in an advocacy hour in solidarity with other UU congregations around the country. This is a multi-generational event, so please join us for conversations, worship, advocacy, and 2 spirit-filled days. You can sign up in the back or email admin@canandaiguauu.org to let us know if you plan to come on Saturday. Are there any other announcements for the good of the community?
Our visiting minister next week would appreciate if everyone would be willing to wear masks during the service, or if you come to chat with her after. We will provide masks here at church, but if you have some at home that are just sitting around and you bring your own, that's great too. Thank you.
One more piece on the climate justice activity. If on Saturday we have a sign up in the back for bringing a dish to pass so that we have some sustenance right after our event.
And connected with the climate justice revival, the choir met this morning to get a song ready, and we will meet again next Sunday at 9:15. And anyone who wasn't here today at 9:15 is welcome to join us next week at 9:15, and we'll practice up our song and be ready to sing it on the 29th. So please feel welcome to join us.
Thank you. As we prepare to be fully together, I remind you to silence your phones and devices. We now enter a space of worship. Now is the time to bring forward any joys or sorrows, or come up to drop a pebble. Now is the time to light the chalice. Would anyone like to help me? Thank you. Nice job. That's later. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
This morning about my friend Tenzin. When I was 20, I was living in India, and I spent some time in Dharamshala, the Tibetan exile community in the Himalayas of India. And there I met my friend Tenzin, who is a Tibetan monk. He was 3 when his parents sent him and a group of other unaccompanied children across the border from Tibet into India to escape Chinese persecution. And he was raised in the monastery of the Dalai Lama there in Dharamshala, India. And then when he grew up, he took vows and became a Tibetan Buddhist monk. And so Tenzin and I were chatting as we got to know each other in Dharamshala, and he was telling me about the vows he took as a monk, some of which are similar to Christian monks or Christian nuns' vows of poverty, right? So he took a vow that he would not own property or handle money. And so when he was hungry for his breakfast, his lunch, and his dinner, he would go door to door in his community or up and down the marketplace of street vendors selling food with an empty bowl and ask his neighbors to fill it with food. And I asked him from a very American perspective, how does it feel to do that? Because we have, in our culture, a real stigma, a real shame associated with begging. Is it hard to beg for food? Does it feel shameful? And he said, no, I feel very proud to beg. I'm doing a service to my community. These are Buddhists who are looking to be good, to be generous, to find ways to build their good karma, to build the goodness in their life. And I'm offering them an opportunity to be generous. And they are better people when we ask them for something and they have the opportunity to give it to us. And I have, for the 20 years since then, really thought a lot about the way that Tenzin taught me to view generosity, taught me to view asking for what we need and giving what we have. And I think in some ways that's why we come to church, right? Because this is a place where we can practice a different sort of generosity, where we can know that when we ask for what we need, we're blessing our neighbors with the opportunity to be good, the opportunity to practice generosity. And when someone asks us for what they need, when they come here with their needs laid bare to their community, we know that we're blessed by their acts. So I ask you this morning, would you rise in body or in spirit and joyfully sing together our opening hymn as we begin worship? It is number 12 in the gray hymnal, Life That Maketh All Things New. Is anybody interested in helping me tell the story today? I thought so. Do we have a helper for Oren? One other person, maybe? Okay. So the story goes like this. It's pretty short and sweet. There was a man named Androcles who escaped from slavery. He ran away from his enslavers. And as he was running, he found a cave to hide in. Here's your cave right here, Androcles. He ran and hid in this cave, but from the back of the cave, suddenly Androcles started to hear a noise. It was like a low rumble. And he crept towards the back of the cave. Yeah, see what it sounded like? That's exactly what it sounded like. So Androcles crept towards the back of the cave, and there he noticed, right here, it took him a while to see, but then he noticed a lion lying at the back of the cave, and he was terrified. He was scared for his life. wasn't walking toward Androcles or even putting any weight on his paw at all. And so Androcles crept a little closer and a little closer, and then he saw that this lion had a huge thorn sticking out of his front paw. And Androcles was good of heart. He had a generous spirit, and so risking his own life, he went up to the lion and pulled the thorn out of his paw. And the lion, having sung gratitude for this gracious act, did not eat him. Androcles stayed hidden in that cave for some time. I think the thorn is out. But then eventually he went on his way. He continued traveling down the road until one day he was captured. He was captured as an escaped slave, and he was thrown into the gladiators' arena, into the Circus Maximus, into the lion's den. And there he saw a lion who looked very familiar. Now this lion was meant to eat Androcles, but the lion must have thought, we don't know because the lion in this story doesn't talk, but the lion must have thought, this man looks mighty familiar as well. It turned out that this lion was the very lion that Androcles had saved some weeks or maybe years back. And the lion did nothing to Androcles except snuggle his big bushy mane up against him. Androcles beheaded the lion, and the Romans who had captured him were so amazed that they let both Androcles and the lion go, which, what else are you going to do when there's a man and a lion teamed up together? And so the story goes that for the rest of their days, Androcles and his friend, the lion, wandered through the streets and towns of the empire, and no one harmed either of them because they both took care of each other. And this is the end of our story. Thank you for your help.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts of both time and money support our church in its work. Each week, we would like to spotlight a group or committee and thank them for their gift of time. This week, the group is Religious Education. This is our first RE for the season, right? So a great time to make a shout out to that team. Anyone interested in finding out more can contact Nancy Reed or Kaya Mells. Thank you. 1/4 of our plate collection for the harvest season goes to the Greater Rochester Habitat for Humanity, who builds strength, stability, and self-reliance through shelter. You can give to this morning's offering by placing cash or a check into the basket or by one of the options on your screen. Please make a note that your gift is intended for today's offering. We now gratefully accept the offering.
Everyone needs the vine and victory shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone needs the vine and victory shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more.
Now is the time in our service for sharing our joys and sorrows with one another. Friends, we are a community that holds each other in our celebrations and in our pain. In our joys and in our sorrows alike, we say to one another with promise on our lips, we are with you. And we hold these joys and sorrows in our hearts this morning. We hold tenderness for Mary Beth and wish her well as she recovers from a fractured ankle. We also hold in our hearts our Minister Emerita, Reverend Maureen, who is recovering from a broken hip and is dealing with a recent diagnosis of Alzheimer's. If you would like to send a card to Reverend Maureen, there's an address in our newsletter where she is receiving cards, which would be greatly appreciated. It turns out being in a rehab facility is actually pretty boring.
She's with us on Zoom.
She's here on Zoom. Hi, Maureen. Today we celebrate Aaron's joy that it is Mike's birthday. Happy birthday, Mike. And Mike's surprise to be named in these joys and sorrows. We're with you, Mike. We share with Thomas joy that his dad is back in Canandaigua and the concurrent sorrow that it's been a struggle to make the move. We share joy with Kaya, who is thankful for all the supportive family and friends that she has. And joy with some members who are just happy to hear the conversations among us before the service and who are feeling gratitude for their home and their family. For all these and for the sorrows left inside the silence of our hearts, we will drop one last stone and we will say to one another, we are with you. Will you say it with me? We are with you. And now it is time for religious education. If you are going to head downstairs to religious education, you can follow Miss Kaya down the stairs now.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of all surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Now we come to the time in our service where we enter into a period of centering and meditation, followed by some shared silence. I invite you to get comfortable in your seat. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Find your feet planted on the earth beneath you. As we remind ourselves that by silence, of course, we mean the absence of grown-ups talking to one another, so that we can listen more closely to the sounds of life, to the wind rushing by the windows outside, to the giggles and footsteps of our children as they run downstairs to play, to the breath of the neighbor in the seat beside us, to the beating of our own hearts. This morning's centering words come from Wendell Berry. Let's take a deep breath in and let it out with a sigh. Horseback on Sunday morning, harvest over, we taste persimmon and wild grape, sharp, sweet of summer's end. In time's maze over fall fields, we name names that rest on graves. We open a persimmon seed to find the tree that stands in promise, pale in the seed's marrow. Geese appear high over us, pass, and the sky closes. Abandon, as in love or sleep, holds them to their way, clear in the ancient faith. What we need is here. And we pray, not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. Amen. This morning's reading is an excerpt from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She writes this: "It's funny how the nature of an object, let's say a strawberry or a pair of socks, is so changed by the way it has come into your hands, as a gift or a commodity. The pair of wool socks that I buy at the store, red and gray striped, are warm and cozy. I might feel grateful for the sheep that made the wool and the worker who ran the knitting machine. I hope so. But I have no inherent obligation to those socks as a commodity, as private property. There is no bond beyond the politely exchanged thank yous with the clerk. I have paid for them, and our reciprocity ended the minute I handed her the money. The exchange ends once parity has been established, an equal exchange. They become my property. I don't write a thank you note to the J.C. Penney. But what if those very same socks, red and gray striped, were knitted by my grandmother and given as a gift? That changes everything. A gift creates ongoing relationship. I will write a thank you note. I will take good care of them. And if I am a very gracious grandchild, I'll wear them when she visits, even if I don't like them. When it's her birthday, I will surely make her a gift in return. As the scholar and writer Lewis Hyde notes, it is the cardinal difference between gift and commodity exchange that a gift establishes a feeling bond between two people. Wild strawberries fit the definition of gift, but grocery store berries do not. It's the relationship between producer and consumer that changes everything. As a gift thinker, I would be deeply offended if I saw wild strawberries in the grocery store. I would want to kidnap them all. They were not meant to be sold, only to be given. Hyde reminds us that in a gift economy, one's freely given gifts cannot be made into someone else's capital. I can see the headline now. Woman arrested for shoplifting produce. Strawberry Liberation Front claims responsibility. When berries offer their sweetness to birds and bears and boys alike, the transaction does not end there. Something beyond gratitude is asked of us. The berries trust that we will uphold our end of the bargain and disperse their seeds to new places to grow, which is good for berries and for boys. They remind us that all flourishing is mutual. We need the berries, and the berries need us. Their gifts multiply by their care for us and by our care for them, and dwindle from our neglect. We are bound in a covenant of reciprocity, a pact of mutual responsibility to sustain those who sustain us. And so the empty bowl is filled. I want to tell you a story that's similar but different in so many ways from our opening words this morning. This story is about my great-great-Aunt Bess. Aunt Bess was always the oldest person that I knew. She was born in the year 1900, and she lived until 2002, spanning a whole century and then an extra couple years just for good measure. And she lived, I think by any description, a hard life. She raised my grandfather, which is how I came to be so close to her. Both of his parents died before he was 5, and then when his grandmother, Bess's mother, died, she took him in, along with, during the Depression, a number of other children. The relationship familially to us, I never quite could understand. Some were related, some were found family, but Bess took them all in. She got about a 6th grade education before she went to work in a factory to support the family farm, which was not making enough to support itself, and continued, apparently, to take in other people's children along the way. She certainly qualified for newly developed government welfare programs that came about during the Depression, but she was so hesitant, so reluctant to take part in any of them. The biggest reason because she feared that if she accepted charity, then she would be beholden to the government for all these children who were not legally hers, but who were in her care. She feared those children would be taken away. And the family always told this story of a welfare officer of some kind or another, I think the title changed through the years, coming up the steps of the farmhouse and with a check in hand for food relief, and my Aunt Bess chasing him off the steps with a pitchfork in her hand, refusing to accept that kind of generosity, the kind of generosity that comes with a power relationship fully intact, with the exchange of something that to her was too precious to put up for bargain. And I think about how different that is from the take on generosity that my friend Tenzin grew up with. In this church season, the harvest season of September and October, our worship and small group theme is generosity. You may be catching on to that. Staff and volunteers from our 3 local churches create the worship and small group materials together, and we chose all 6 themes for the year before choosing which seasons they would fit into. Discerning church nerds will have noticed that they are the UU values newly articulated at this summer's General Assembly: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. And so the bulk of our group work at the summer planning meeting was deciding which theme fit into which season. And generosity was a toughie. There was, I hate to admit it, an initial instinct to put it in the muddy season of late winter and early spring. And you know why, right? Can you guess why? Yes, Bill. It's stewardship time. That's when our pledge drive happens. The whole 2 months of stewardship sermons, and we were like, what could go wrong? The people will love it. The fact that you're laughing at the absurdity of that is why we quickly changed our minds. We could not put it in the muddy season. And we quickly realized that the commission who chose these 6 values particular to our faith, shout out to Maya Waller, Mike's daughter, who's on that commission, circling these 6 values, circling the larger value of love at the center of everything. They did not throw generosity in because financial giving is so important to our communities. It isn't unimportant. We've got to keep the lights on. But I don't think that's exclusively why generosity made the list of UU values. I don't think charity as a one-directional flow of commodity resources, a Band-Aid on the wounds of capitalism, is the value we're upholding. I think the generosity that circles the love that leaves no one out is about something a little bit more. I think the kind of generosity we name, when we name it among our core values, is a generosity that's reciprocal. It's relational. It moves in a circle. This is a long-winded explanation of why we decided to honor this value at the harvest time when the earth is inviting us into reciprocity with herself. Generosity of the type we are celebrating in this season is born out of gratitude, right? We are grateful for what we have, so grateful that we feel compelled to share it, right? It's, this ice cream is so good, you've got to taste it. And gratitude, as my favorite Benedictine monk, David Steindl-Rast, always says, that's a short list, but he is my favorite Benedictine monk. He always says generosity, gratitude is born out of awe. The source of gratitude is awe, wonder, of being bowled over by the splendor and abundance of the world. That wow that hits you right in the chest when you come across a rainbow or a sweetheart's smile or a perfectly ripe tomato. And awe is made possible by vulnerability, by the sort of soft openness to whatever arrives, by the careful dismantling of any protective walls built up to maintain our sense of security. A person who lets themselves be truly vulnerable, like my friend Tenzin, comes to understand that everything good, down to our very being alive,
is gratuitous. We don't earn our way into being, and we can't unearn it. Life itself is a gift. This vulnerability connects us to a deep understanding that the very spirit of life is a spirit of reciprocal generosity, a gratuitous circle. Giving makes us vulnerable, but vulnerability makes room for awe, which grows gratitude, which gives birth to our generosity all over again. I would call this whole feedback loop of reciprocity grace. The nature of life, the spirit of life is grace. And grace, I realize, as a theological construct, is not something UUs talk a lot about. In spite of the fact that it usually has to do with unearned gifts, particularly the gifts of this restorative circle, right? Not a one-directional charity, but a reciprocal loop that makes us whole, restored, saved, if you will. And that our universalist forebears were, of all the theologians, the most insistent that salvation is not an achievement. It is gratuitous, a universal gift as unearned as being born. I probably don't have to tell you that I don't mean grace in the mainstream Protestant Christian sense, though it's worth taking a moment here to be clear. I don't mean the definition that's been co-opted by American Christian nationalism. The gift of substitutionary atonement for a broken sin nature is not what we're talking about. That's some bullshit we don't have time for today. I am talking about the grace that Robin Wall Kimmerer describes, but doesn't name in that way. I mean a grace that holds the kind of brokenness that isn't like a propensity for sin, but it is like a deep vulnerability at our core. The kind of brokenness that is like broken bread at a common table. I don't mean grace like a commodity from some other worldly being, whether we believe in one of those or not, paid for with the price of our undoubting loyalty. I mean a relational generosity that is inherent to this world, to the earth. It matters that the abundance of this world is gratuitous. We did not earn an ounce of this earth's loveliness. We do not earn our way into being. Our being in this rich and lovely world is entirely a gift. And so is every other being in the whole, wide, interdependent web. That is grace, holding love at the center of our values. And I know I said Christian nationalist theology was some bullshit we don't have time for today, but it is like the building block of our society, the nationalism in the Christian nationalism, so we have to, don't we? Let's dig in. I don't think anybody in this church today, or in their PJs on Zoom, needs me to say this to them, personally. But as a society, we need to hear it loud and clear, and probably more often. Jesus died for my sins is bad theology. It's bad theology because it's intellectually and spiritually lazy, and it's bad theology because it does a lot of harm. And again, I know you personally are probably not hinging your faith on this bad theology, just guessing, but its impact is so far-reaching, we do have to talk about it. I promise, undergirding the worst offenses of our society without noticing, it is there. It is the cornerstone of white supremacy. It is the engine driving the extractive capitalism that Robin Wall Kimmerer is railing against in her book. So first things first, I want to tell you a lesson from a somewhat radical professor at my Baptist seminary who was an expert in the Pauline texts, all those letters from Paul to the whoever's in the Christian Bible. So one morning this professor came in and he drew 2 columns on the board in the classroom. And on the top of one he wrote forgivable sins. And at the top of the other he wrote unforgivable sins. And he just started naming sins and asking the students what column they belonged in. Lying, gossip, theft, murder, everything, as you might imagine, landed in the forgivable category. So then he finally asked, Okay, so what precludes someone from salvation? What sends a person to hell? And boy, did those Baptist hands go up. Not taking Jesus into your heart as your personal Lord and Savior was the answer, of course. And so he wrote, as the one unforgivable sin, doubt. And stared us down and asked, what the hell kind of grace is that? You following? Jesus died for my sins is really shitty theology. It's terrible because it covers over every atrocity but the uncertainty that keeps us vulnerable and soft. It's terrible because it individualizes both sin and salvation, neither of which, if they're going to be theological concepts at all, can stand alone. And maybe we see now how it is the building block of America, right? We have commodified even our relationship with the divine. It's tit for tat, faith for grace. We can avoid considering structural or societal harms if salvation is necessarily personal. Any failings are individual failings, not societal failings. And we get to, as individuals, not a collective, put on an armor of salvation one by one, as if love could be at the center of any system that leaves someone out. And if you ask me, if Jesus died for any sins, it was the sin of empire, of a people who let power amass in the hands of the few and the violent, who traded the reciprocity of life for the one-directional flow of safety from power. And if salvation is real, it is in the undoing of that, in the reciprocal generosity of the world, in true grace, not cheap grace, not transactional grace where we exchange the vulnerability of doubt for the promise of security, here or later. Let's do a little analogy. One of my favorite theologians, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was a German Lutheran who also had quite a bit to say about why the idea of transactional grace that cancels out a sinful nature was, as we've established, some real bullshit. He did not write it that way. I am paraphrasing him. He's much classier than I am. This idea that one, a person could acquire forgiveness or salvation by professing faith, and then two, that forgiveness could cover any manner of terrible immoral behavior forever after, was something he called cheap grace, a term I have happily stolen. He wrote all this at a time when his own country of Germany was building a fascist regime and his own church was aligning itself with the power of the Nazi state. The church was offering the state, by its public support, moral indemnity, a get-out-of-hell-free card, an unearned gift. But that gift was, as Bonhoeffer put it, cheap grace. True grace, he wrote, is costly. It is reciprocal, but it's not transactional. Not a cover-all forgiveness for any behavior in exchange for belief. True grace doesn't cover over, he said. It transforms. Transformation is our theme next season. We'll get to that in November. True grace, he said, costly grace, is understood by knowing our vulnerability. That is the cost. That is the entry point to the cycle of reciprocity that we call grace. And I'm sad to say it's not hard to wrap my mind around what Bonhoeffer was warning against in today's America. We have seen for hundreds of years a system of so-called justice working in tandem with vigilantes and lynch mobs who serve its white supremacist underpinnings. We see a white Christian church that has for far too long offered this system its cheap grace, a gift that is certainly undeserved and unearned, but not substantive and not saving, just the cheapest of grace. Once again, I'm not preaching this to you all because I think you personally need to be told that this is bad theology, that this is cheap grace. I'm preaching it because I think you, as a community, have a lived theology of true grace that could be a life-saving antidote to this one. Do you remember 2021, like season 2 of COVID? that was the year that you all, as a community, decided to spend a non-small amount of congregational resources on a playground. In a pandemic, we hadn't yet even begun to have regular in-person worship again. You all mostly hadn't seen our congregation's children for 18 months. And we sure as heck had no certainty about how many children would show up to be with us, if any, when we came back to our building. And your elected leaders said to me in a Zoom meeting, "It's not just a practical purchase, Eileen, it's a signpost. It says to every child in a car going past our church that we thought of them, that this is a place where they could belong." I also watch you lay out a feast every second Sunday, sometimes barely fitting on the table, and sometimes more like a bowl of beans and some Wegmans cookies. But no matter how much appears, you announce from this pulpit with joy, "Please stay and eat. Whether you brought something or not, there is plenty for everyone," you say every second Sunday. This is a community with faith and abundance. This is a community with the spiritual experience in practicing reciprocity, participating in that cycle of grace, of gratitude, awe, vulnerability, and generosity. I need us to share that with the world. The world needs us to share that. If anything saves us from the societal sin of individualist Christian nationalism, it will be knowing how to participate in that circle of grace. It is the faith we put in abundance because we know that grace is the nature of life. I preach this today because you all have an understanding that this world needs. You understand that this holy text is written on the body of the earth. The world is abundant and life is a gift. We are not, in our spiritual or our political lives, called to emulate a system of corrupt capitalism that tells us scarcity is the way of the world, that tells us life is cutthroat, individualist, transactional endeavor, and to secure whatever resources we can to ourselves. Life is abundant, and I think you know that here. And it's most abundant when it's allowed to be vulnerable, by which I mean to be interdependent. When we accept the vulnerability that comes with being one small part of a harmonious system and not a rugged, bootstrapping individual, we get to take part in the reciprocity of grace. We could, as a society, continue to buy into shitty theological foundations. We've been doing it for several hundred years. We could just keep going and see where that takes us. We could spend our whole lives building walls against our interconnection to make ourselves feel more secure. And miss out on ever feeling connected to the wider web. We could, in a quest for invulnerability, rob ourselves of belonging. Excuse me. But I think you all know a better way of being. And the world needs you to share it, to show it. It's a hard theology to live, to choose to let go of control and know ourselves to be vulnerable to life. It's hard, but you're living it here in this community, and your living it is a gift to the world. May it always be so. Amen.
Stars pour
I offer as a benediction these words once again from Wendell Berry. We pray not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. Amen. Would you rise in body or in spirit and join together in singing our closing hymn, number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth.
For the beauty of the earth, for the splendor of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies, stores of all to thee we raise. This is our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of here and now, for the heart and mind's delight, for the mystic harmony, linking sense to sound and sight, stores of all to thee we raise. This is our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of each hour of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light, stores of all to thee we raise. This is our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of you and care, sister, brother, parent, child, for the kinship we all share, for all gentle thoughts that lie, stores of all to thee we raise. This is our hymn of grateful praise.
If you are joining us on Zoom, now is the time to turn your camera on if you would like to wave goodbye. Will you please join me in our words for extinguishing the chalice? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts till we are together again.